I was 10 minutes late the morning everything changed. 10 minutes. In 3 years of working for Mr. Kang Junho, I had never once been late, not once. Not when my taxi broke down on the N1 highway, and I walked for miles in the cold rain with my shoes soaking through and my coat doing nothing against the wind. Not when my mother had one of her bad nights and I sat awake beside her until 3 in the morning, holding her hand through the pain, then still managed to get dressed and arrive before sunrise. Not even on the morning of my cousin Tandy's funeral, when I ironed my black dress at 5 a.m., said goodbye to her photograph on the dresser, and still placed his coffee on his desk before he walked through the door. But that Tuesday morning in March, I was 10 minutes late, and the moment I pushed open the heavy glass door of Kang & Associates, I felt it immediately. The shift, the wrongness. The office was quiet in that particular way offices get quiet when something is being noticed. Not loud wrong, not shouting wrong. Just the kind of wrong that hums underneath everything, like a current running below the floor that nobody wants to touch. Minjun, the junior assistant, looked up from his computer and looked away too quickly. Suyeon, who handled the accounts, pretended to be deeply interested in something on her phone. Even the security guard, old Mr. Park, who usually nodded at me with that slow, dignified greeting he reserved only for people he truly respected, even he avoided my eyes that morning. I held my spine like a steel rod. That is something my grandmother Nambula taught me before she passed. She said, Nakwanda, when life tries to bend you, you make yourself tall. You do not let the world see you folding. So I lifted my chin, I set my shoulders back, I walked forward. But holding my spine like steel did not stop the pain shooting up from my left ankle with every single step I took across that marble floor. I walked slowly, carefully, deliberately. I was trying so hard not to limp. I was trying to shift my weight to step softly, to make it look like a woman simply moving with quiet dignity across a room. But pain has a way of overruling the mind. It was too loud inside my body to be fully hidden outside it. And apparently it showed because by the time I reached my desk, positioned directly outside Mr. Kang's office door, Minjun had turned back around and was staring openly. I did not look at him. I set my bag down, I pulled out my notebook, I checked the messages on the office phone. I did these things methodically, one at a time, the way I always did. Routine was important to me. Routine meant control, and control was the only thing standing between me and complete collapse on most days. Then the door to Mr. Kang's office opened. He did not say anything at first, he never did. Mr. Kang Junho was not a man of unnecessary words. He was tall for a Korean man, broad-shouldered with gray beginning to salt his dark hair at the temples. 53 years old. Though most people guessed younger because there was something ageless in the way he held himself, something that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with the particular weight of a man who had survived things most people could not imagine. He wore dark suits exclusively, always well-tailored, always pressed. He smelled faintly of cedar wood, and something else I could never quite identify, something clean and serious, like a room where important decisions are made. He stood in his doorway and looked at me, not rudely, not with anger. With that particular stillness, he had the kind of stillness that powerful men sometimes carry when they are gathering information before they decide anything at all. You are late, he said. His English was precise, formal, learned with intention. Yes, sir, I said. I apologize sincerely. It will not happen again. He said nothing for a moment. The silence in that office felt enormous. Then my coffee, coming right away, sir. I turned to walk toward the small kitchen alcove at the side of the office, and that is when it happened. That is when my left ankle, which had been holding on through pure willpower for the past 40 minutes, made its decision. I took one step and my body dipped just slightly, just a small involuntary downward tilt to the left, and I caught myself on the edge of a nearby desk immediately, but not before it was visible. Not before Mr. Kang saw it. I kept walking. I did not turn around. I went to the kitchen. I made his coffee exactly the way he took it, black, no sugar, half a cup. Always exactly half a cup. And I carried it back to his desk with both hands wrapped around the mug because my hands were trembling slightly and I did not want him to see that either. I placed it on his desk. He was seated now, looking at some documents, a pen in his right hand, but as I set the mug down and turned to leave, he spoke without looking up. Sit down, Nakwanda, my full name. He used my full name. In 3 years, I could count on one hand the number of times he had done that. He called me Miss Dilamini in formal settings and usually nothing at all in private. He would simply begin speaking and trust that I was listening, because I always was. I sat in the chair across from his desk, the client chair, the chair where important men sat when they came to negotiate things that could not be discussed by phone. I had never sat in that chair before. What happened to your leg? He asked. He kept writing. He did not look up. Nothing, sir, I said. I am fine. Now he looked up. His eyes were very dark and very still, like deep water on a windless morning. He looked at me for a long time, long enough that I had to work extremely hard not to look away first. "You are limping," he said. "It is not serious," I said. "I did not ask if it was serious," he said quietly. "I asked what happened, and that is when I understood that something had shifted." Because Mr. Kang Junho was not a man who asked questions out of politeness. He had no use for comfortable lies or the smooth evasions that people use to make mornings easier. When he asked a question, he wanted its true answer. And when he looked at you the way he was looking at me then, with that complete, unblinking, gathering attention, lying to him felt not simply inadvisable. It felt impossible, but I was not ready. "Not yet," I twisted it, I said. "Walking, I am managing fine." He held my gaze for one more long moment, then he looked back down at his papers. "You may go," he said. I stood. I walked back to my desk. I sat down very carefully and tried to breathe through the pain quietly and told myself what I had been telling myself for 6 weeks, that it was going to be all right. That I could manage, that I had no other choice. My name is Nkwanda Dlamini. I am 34 years old. I was born in Umlazi in KwaZulu-Natal province, the eldest of 4 children. My mother's name is Zainal. My father left when I was 9 years old. Not dramatically, not in the way it happens in films, with arguments and broken dishes and a door slammed so hard the windows shake. He simply went to Johannesburg for work 1 month and did not come back. My mother never spoke badly of him. She looked at us once after waiting 3 months for a phone call that never came, and she said very quietly, "He is one of those men the city swallows." Then she returned to her sewing machine and continued feeding us. I grew up watching my mother be strong so completely and so consistently that I sometimes wondered if she had ever truly been afraid of anything. She sewed school uniforms and church dresses and wedding garments for the women in our community. She worked from before sunrise until after all the children were in bed. She never complained. She just worked, she just continued. I learned everything important from watching her work. I came to Johannesburg when I was 22 with a diploma in business administration, 200 rand in my wallet, and a cousin named Tandy who let me sleep on her floor for 3 months until I found my feet. That first job was at a printing company in Sandton where I made barely enough to live on, but I learned everything I could. I learned how offices breathed. I learned how men in power thought and moved, and what they needed before they knew they needed it. I learned the particular art of becoming indispensable to people above you without ever making them feel threatened by your competence. That last skill is a precise art. A woman in an office learns it quickly or she does not last. I came to work for Mr. Kang 3 years ago through a recommendation from his previous secretary, a quiet, methodical Chinese woman named Helen who was leaving Johannesburg to follow her husband to Singapore. Before she left, she sat across from me over tea and said, "Mr. Kang is not an easy man to work for. But if you do your work properly and you do not pretend to be something you are not, he will respect you. And his respect, Miss Dlamini, is worth considerably more than most men's warmth." She was entirely correct. The first months were difficult in ways I had not anticipated. He tested me not with obvious challenges but with silence and expectation. He would say something once, quietly and completely, and if I had not listened carefully enough or had misunderstood, there was no second explanation. There was only the consequence. I learned to listen with my whole body. I made very few mistakes. Within 6 months, I had earned from him something I came to understand was genuinely rare in his world. He trusted me, completely. I managed his calendar, his calls, his correspondence. I prepared his reports and coordinated his meetings. I dealt with the lawyers and the accountants and the various business associates who moved through that office. And yes, I understood within the first 3 months what kind of business Mr. Kang truly operated. I was not a naive woman. Certain visitors were never recorded in any official diary. Certain conversations I did not hear and certain documents I did not ask about. What I did know was that his conduct toward me was always professional, always respectful, and always fair. He paid me properly. He spoke to me as a person. He treated my work as worth something. In the world I had come from, that counted for a very great deal. Outside of work, my life was my mother, Zainal Dlamini, who had been diagnosed 18 months ago with a degenerative neurological disease that was slowly, systematically dismantling her body from the inside. It had started in her fingers. She had noticed first when her sewing became imprecise, when her stitches lost the perfection she had maintained for 30 years, when her hands began doing something slightly different from what her mind instructed. Then it moved to her arms, then her legs. By the time I brought her to live with me in Turfontein, she needed a wheelchair for most of her movement and assistance with nearly everything. My siblings, 2 sisters and a brother, were good people with their own difficult lives. They called on weekends. They came when they could. But the daily weight of my mother's care rested on me, and I accepted that weight not with resentment but with love. She had carried us for our entire childhoods without complaint and without asking anything back. I was simply returning what had been given, but returning it was extraordinarily expensive. Her medication alone consumed more than a third of my monthly salary. The private nursing aide, a warm and capable woman named Grace who stayed with my mother during my working hours, cost another significant portion. Then the rent, the food, the electricity, the medical supplies, the small efforts I made to ensure my mother's days had some dignity and comfort in them, all of it drawn from the same single salary. I had become a mathematics of survival. Every month was an equation I solved by removing things from my own side of the ledger. I skipped lunches. I wore the same work clothes in careful rotation for over a year. I had not bought new shoes for myself in 11 months. My car had broken down 8 months ago, and I had quietly set aside the idea of repairing it because the cost was simply not possible. Instead, I took taxis and walked 3 kilometers from the nearest taxi rank to the office every morning and 3 kilometers back every evening. 3 kilometers every day. In the dark of early morning and the heavy heat of late afternoon. I did all of this without drama and without announcement because drama accomplished nothing, and my grandmother and my mother had taught me that you do not perform your suffering. You carry it. Uprightly with your head held and your back straight. But 6 weeks before that Tuesday morning, something happened that made the carrying profoundly harder. It was a Friday evening in late January. Grace, the nursing aide, had called me at lunchtime with a trembling voice to say that her youngest child had been rushed to the clinic with a high fever, and she needed to leave immediately. I told her without hesitation, go now, I will manage. I spent the rest of my lunch break calling my sister in Durban who could not come, calling my neighbor Mrs. Peterson, who was 71 and sometimes helped in small ways, who was also unavailable. I went back to my desk and worked through the afternoon, and then I took the taxi home and went directly to my mother. She was having one of her bad days. The disease had its rhythms, good days and days that were something worse than bad. This was one of the worst ones. She was uncomfortable and in significant pain, and she needed to move from her wheelchair to the bed, and there was no mechanical lift in our small apartment. On normal days, Grace accomplished this with a careful technique she had developed over months. On the days Grace was not there, I did it myself. I positioned myself correctly. I spoke to my mother calmly, telling her what we were going to do, step by step, the way Grace had shown me, and we began the transfer. But then my mother shifted her weight in a direction I had not anticipated, and for one terrible second we were both off balance and she began to fall. And every instinct I had fired at once. I cannot let her hit the floor, I cannot let her fall. She cannot fall, and I twisted my entire body and caught her full weight against my left side, and I brought her down onto the bed safely. She did not fall, she did not hit the floor, she was safe, and from somewhere deep inside my left ankle came a sound that I will never forget, like something tearing that was not meant to tear. And then immediately a pain so complete and so total that it took everything I had not to cry out. I laid my mother down gently. I arranged her properly against the pillows. I smoothed her hair away from her face with steady hands and told her everything was fine. We were both fine, she was safe. She looked at my face and she was not fooled for even 1 second. Nkosi Yami Nkwanda, she whispered, my God Nkwanda, your leg. It is nothing, Mama, I said, rest now. I sat down on the floor beside her bed, not in defeat, in necessity. The pain had taken my ability to stand for the moment, and I simply needed to wait it out. I sat there for perhaps 20 minutes while my mother drifted to sleep. And then I got up and I made her dinner and I bathed her and I got her into her night clothes and I sat beside her until she was fully asleep. Then I went to the bathroom, closed the door and looked at my ankle. It had swollen to nearly double its size. The color was something I had never seen on my own body before. I did not go to the hospital. My mother could not be left alone and I could not afford the emergency room. I opened the first aid box and I wrapped the ankle as firmly as I could manage. I took 2 of my mother's anti-inflammatory tablets. I went to bed. On Monday morning I was back at work. I told no one. For 6 weeks I maintained this silence. Every morning I wrapped the ankle tightly before putting on my shoes. I took whatever pain medication I could afford. I wore my flattest, most supportive shoes. I rested the ankle under my desk and I walked with complete deliberateness whenever I was visible, correcting my gait continuously. Allowing myself to limp only in the moments when I was certain nobody was looking. I did all of this because I could not afford to be seen as someone whose life was unraveling. I could not afford for Mr. Kang Jun-ho to look at me and see unreliability. I could not afford to lose this position. My mother's medication, Grace's wages, the rent, the food, the electricity, everything depended on me remaining upright. And then came a Tuesday morning in March, and I was 10 minutes late, and the man who noticed everything looked up from his desk and saw me limp. After that morning in his office, I believed he would let the matter rest. He did not. The following morning, as I set his coffee on his desk, he looked up directly. "How is your leg today?" he asked. "Improving, sir," I said. "Has a doctor examined it?" "It is not necessary," I said. He lifted the coffee cup and held it without drinking. "I see," he said. His voice gave away nothing. The morning after that, a plain white paper bag sat on my desk when I arrived. No note, no explanation. Inside, a compression bandage, medical grade, the kind that costs real money, and a tube of prescription-strength anti-inflammatory gel. I stood at my desk holding these items and felt something complicated move through me, something between gratitude and shame and a deep, aching exhaustion. At lunchtime, I went to the bathroom and replaced my worn bandage with the new one. The difference was immediate, significant. I returned to my desk and sat down and breathed for a moment. "He never mentioned it, I never mentioned it." That was the particular language of our professional relationship, care expressed without ceremony, needs addressed without the exposure of acknowledgement. It was unusual, but it was real. The following Monday, during our regular schedule review, he waited until I had stood to leave before speaking. "You walk 3 kilometers from the taxi rank to this office." I stopped moving. It was not a question, it was a statement of fact he had somehow obtained. I did not know through whom, I did not ask. "The route is not always direct," I said carefully. 3 kilometers, he said, "on an ankle that has not been properly treated." "I manage," I said. He looked at me with that still deep, gathering quality in his eyes. "Miss Delamini," he said. "You have worked for me for 3 years. In that time you have not taken a single day of sick leave. You have worked late on 47 evenings in the past year alone. You have made one significant error, a scheduling conflict last April that you caught and corrected yourself within the hour." I said nothing. "Why did you not tell me you were injured?" he asked. The question sat between us like something that deserved a careful answer. I held my notebook against my chest like a shield and chose honesty. "Because it is not your problem, sir," I said. "And because I cannot afford for you to see me as someone who has too many problems. I can manage, I have always managed." He was quiet for a long moment. He turned the phrase over visibly, the way a person turns a stone to examine what lives underneath it. "You may go," he said finally. I went back to my desk. And the pain said nothing, and I said nothing, and the day continued the way days continue when there is no other option available. 9 days after that Tuesday morning, on a Thursday evening, I stayed late to prepare documents for an important meeting the following day. By 9 o'clock, most of the office was empty. Minjun was still at his computer with his headphones on. The light under Mr. Kang's door was still burning as it burned most nights. I finished the last document. I saved everything. I packed my bag, put on my coat, gathered myself and stood up from my desk. My ankle gave way, not gradually, not the slow, building ache I had learned to live beside like an unwanted companion. This was sudden and absolute, a pain so sharp and so total that it stole my breath completely. My hand shot out and grabbed the edge of the desk. I lowered myself back into my chair. My eyes burned. I pressed my lips together hard and breathed through my nose and gave myself the sternest internal command I had ever issued. "Do not cry in this office. Do not you dare," but I was so tired. That is the truth I had not allowed myself to face. Not in 6 weeks, not in the 18 months since my mother's diagnosis. Not in 3 years of working this job, and carrying everything it took to keep this job, and keep my mother comfortable and keep the numbers working and keep the whole careful architecture of my survival intact. I was tired in a way that went all the way through me, not the kind of tired that sleep heals. The kind of tired that lives in your bones and behind your eyes, and in the place in your chest where you keep everything you cannot put down. I sat in the empty office and breathed through the pain and did not cry. I did not hear Mr. Kang's office door open, but I heard his footsteps crossing the floor toward me, slow, deliberate. And then he was there, standing beside my desk, looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. "I apologize, sir." My voice came out wrong, thicker than it should have been, carrying things it was not supposed to carry. "I was just leaving." "Look at me," he said. And the gentleness in his voice was so unexpected and so complete that it nearly undid me entirely. I looked at him. He looked at my face, at whatever was written there that I had no strength left to conceal, and then at my ankle, where the left leg of my trousers had ridden up slightly, and the swelling was plainly visible even through the compression bandage. He pulled Minjun's empty chair around and sat down across from me, close, at the level of a person who intends to stay. This frightened me more than his authority ever had. Because I was always managing. Managing was the one thing I knew how to do without fail. And when someone sits down in front of you and becomes completely still and makes space for the truth, when someone looks at you as though they genuinely want to see what is actually there, sometimes the managing becomes the one thing you can no longer do. Tell me, he said quietly. All of it, everything, and I did. I let it go, all of it. I did not summarize, and I did not protect myself, and I did not perform the dignity of someone who has things under control. I told him about the Friday evening and my mother's transfer from the wheelchair, and the sound my ankle made when I caught her weight, and the 20 minutes I sat on the floor waiting for the pain to become survivable. I told him about wrapping the ankle myself and taking my mother's tablets and going back to work on Monday because there was no alternative that I could see. I told him about my mother's illness. About Grace, about the medication that consumed a third of my salary, about the car that had been broken for 8 months, about the 3 kilometers every morning and every evening in the dark, about the lunches I did not eat and the clothing I did not buy. I told him about the rent notice that had arrived 3 weeks ago, that the building was sold, the new owners were converting it, all tenants must vacate within 2 months. I told him about the nights I spent searching for accessible apartments in our price range and finding nothing that could take a wheelchair. Nothing in an area where I felt my mother would be safe. I told him I had 2 months to solve something that felt completely unsolvable. And I told him that I had walked 3 kilometers on a fractured ankle every single day, and called it managing because the alternative, being seen, being known, being perceived as someone whose life was too heavy, felt more dangerous than the pain. I laid all of it at his feet, the whole weight of it, and then I sat there empty and exposed and trembling slightly and waited. The office was absolutely silent. Minjun had removed his headphones. He sat completely still at his desk, looking at nothing. Mr. Kang had not moved throughout everything I said. He sat with his hands resting on his knees, and he listened with his whole body, not just his ears, but his eyes and his stillness and the complete quality of his attention. He gave me the rarest thing that powerful men rarely give. He gave me the full weight of his presence. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, when did a doctor last examine your ankle? I have not seen a doctor, I said. Why not? I cannot afford the fees and my mother cannot be left alone. He stood, he walked to his office. He returned with his coat over his arm and his car keys in his hand. I am taking you to the hospital, he said. Sir, it is past 9 o'clock. Yes, he said, it is. Come. He drove to the hospital in silence, and I was grateful for it because I had nothing left to say. He walked inside with me. While I registered at the front desk, he stepped away and made a phone call in Korean, brief, quiet, authoritative. We were seen within 20 minutes, which in a Johannesburg hospital at 9:30 on a Thursday night was something close to a miracle. The doctor was a young Indian woman with careful hands and eyes that held the particular compassion of someone who has seen a great deal of suffering and has not yet learned to stop feeling it. She examined my ankle with thoroughness and sent me for x-rays and came back carrying the images with a face that told me something before her mouth did. There is a significant ligament tear, she said, and here, she indicated a point on the x-ray, there is a fracture, a small one but a fracture. The bone has been attempting to heal on its own. Incorrectly because you have been continuing to walk on it. The room was quiet. How long have you been walking on it? She asked. 6 weeks, I said. She looked at me for a moment in the way that certain women look at other women when they recognize something painful and specific. You have been walking on a fractured ankle for 6 weeks, she said. Yes, with a significant ligament tear. Yes, she was quiet briefly. You have a very high pain tolerance. I had no choice, I said. She nodded slowly. I understand, she said, and I believed her completely. She outlined the treatment, a proper medical walking boot for at minimum 6 weeks, physiotherapy, a real prescription for pain management, monitoring for potential long-term joint instability. Mr. Kang stood by the window throughout this. He had followed me into the consultation room without asking permission, and neither the doctor nor I had suggested he leave. When the doctor finished speaking, he asked his only question, what does she need? All of it, everything. The doctor listed it. He listened to every item. Then he took out his phone and made a brief call in Korean. Then he said to the doctor, please arrange everything tonight. Sir, I began. Miss Dilamini, he said. The firmness in his voice was absolute, but underneath it was something else, something I had not heard from him before. 5 minutes, please. I was quiet for 5 minutes. He drove me home in the dark Johannesburg night, and I sat in the passenger seat of his black car wearing the medical boot they had fitted at the hospital, a bag of medication in my lap, watching the city move past the window with all its complicated light. You should have told me, he said. I was afraid, I said. Of what specifically? I considered the question properly. Of being seen as someone with too many problems. People want to employ reliability, steadiness, someone whose life does not spill onto their desk. I could not afford for you to see me as less dependable than I was. He was quiet for a moment that felt full. In 3 years, he said, you have been more reliable than anyone in my professional life, more consistent than my associates, more trustworthy than people I have known for decades. I looked at the window. I have watched you carry weight, he continued. For a long time, I did not know the precise nature of it. But I could see it every day. A silence passed between us that was not uncomfortable. My mother, he said then, and his voice shifted slightly, became something more private. She raised my sister and me without help. My father was not the man he should have been. She worked in a factory. She walked to work on mornings when bus fare was simply not there. She never told us when things became extremely difficult. He paused. I found out years later what she had sacrificed, what she had hidden. How much she had absorbed alone so that we would not have to carry it. I turned to look at his profile in the dark of the car. It made me angry, he said, not at her. At everything that made her feel that hiding it was necessary. We were nearly at my building. I am angry at those circumstances, he said quietly, when I see them repeated. Yes, I said. So am I. He walked me to my building entrance and stopped. A car will come for you every morning and every evening, he said. Until further notice. Sir, that is genuinely too much. It is a work vehicle assigned to a staff member who requires it, he said with the specific finality that ended all discussion. That is all it is. I stood at the door of my building. Upstairs, my mother was sleeping. Grace had sent a message at 8. She had stayed late because something in my messages had told her that the day was hard. Thank you, I said. And because it was the truest thing I had left, I stopped expecting kindness a long time ago. I had forgotten what it felt like to receive it. He looked at me in the half-light of the entrance. You should never have had to forget, he said. It should have been there all along. He turned and walked back to the car. I stood alone at the door and I breathed. And something in my chest that had been pulled tight for an extremely long time, tighter than I had known, tighter than I had let myself feel, began very carefully to release. The car arrived at 7:15 the next morning. Mr. Kang's personal driver, an older man of few words and great dignity, held the door open without ceremony. I got in. We drove in companionable silence. The office shifted in the way that offices shift when an invisible truth becomes slightly less invisible. Min-jun began leaving tea on my desk in the mornings as if he had always done this. Soo-yeon, who had been friendly but maintained a certain professional distance, began spending lunch with me in a way that felt genuine and unforced. No speeches, no explanations. Just small, quiet movements towards something warmer. Mr. Kang's adjustments were equally quiet. He began coming to my desk to hand me documents he needed filed, rather than asking me to walk to the filing room at the far end of the corridor. He paused sometimes at my desk at the end of the day, not quite purposefully, not quite casually, in the way of a man checking something he does not want to make a ceremony of checking. I went to physiotherapy twice weekly. The sessions were handled. I did not ask the precise details and none were offered. I worked through the exercises with discipline, and I felt my ankle healing properly for the first time since the night I had caught my mother falling. 1 week after the hospital, Mr. Kang called me into his office and placed a folder on the desk between us. My people have been working on this since the night at the hospital, he said. The moment you mentioned the eviction notice, I opened the folder, an apartment, ground floor, Mayfair, already partially adapted for wheelchair access. Close to a pharmacy, a park, a reliable taxi route. Photographs, floor plans, notes detailing bathroom modifications and doorway widening that would be completed before occupation at no cost. The rent was within my range, just barely, but within it. He had been working on this in the dark, quietly since that night. While I sat in the passenger seat of his car thinking I was alone with the problem, he had already begun solving it. I sat with the folder in my hands and thought about my mother sewing by lamplight before dawn, about the first night I slept on Tandy's floor, about every taxi and every 3-kilometer walk and every lunch I did not eat, about 6 weeks of calling a fractured ankle nothing. Why? I said. The word came out smaller than I intended. He looked at me steadily. When a person has lived in darkness for a long time, he said, when the work you do exists in spaces that cannot always be called clean, you search for things that confirm goodness is still real. That you can still act rightly towards someone. He paused. You have given me 3 years of complete honesty, complete loyalty, complete dignity. You have asked for nothing beyond your work. You have carried an enormous weight in complete silence. He did not look away. You reminded me that those qualities still exist in the world, he said. That deserves something in return. I held myself together by a thread. My mother, I said finally, she will want to thank you herself. Something moved across his face. Small, quiet, real. Tell her she is welcome, he said. 3 weeks later on a Saturday morning, Mr. Kang arrived at my old building with Mr. Oh and Min-jun and 2 other men, and they moved everything we owned to the new apartment in 3 hours. My mother sat in her wheelchair in the center of the new lounge and directed the entire operation with magnificent authority. She pointed, she instructed. She expressed firm opinions about the placement of every single piece of furniture. She sent Minjun back twice to reposition the bookshelf. She told Mr. Oh that the kitchen table needed to face the window, not the wall, because she was not going to spend her mornings staring at painted brick. Mr. Kang followed her directions without a flicker of resistance. He carried boxes, he moved furniture. He took instructions from an elderly black woman in a wheelchair as though this were the most natural arrangement in the world, which, I believed quietly, was exactly how he intended it to feel. When the last curtain was hung and the bed was made and the apartment had begun to breathe like a home, my mother called him to her. He crossed the room and crouched down beside her wheelchair without being asked, bringing himself to her level without making a performance of it. She took his hands in both of hers. Her hands that had once moved through fabric with such precision, that now trembled with the illness but still held with all the warmth they had ever contained. She spoke to him in Zulu first. Slow and deliberate, with the gravity she reserved for things that mattered completely. Then she said in English, so there would be no mistake, "Thank you for seeing my child." Not for what she could do for you, for what was being done to her. That is a different kind of seeing. Most people never learn it. He said something in Korean quietly. What did you say? My mother asked. Her eyes were steady on his face. He looked at her for a moment. I said she deserved to be seen much sooner than she was. My mother studied him the way she had always studied people, from the inside out, past the surface, looking for what was real. Then she nodded once, slowly, in the way of someone who has reached a conclusion. You are a complicated man, she said. I can see that, but you are a good one. Those two things are not enemies. He smiled fully, without reservation. In 3 years I had never seen him smile like that, with his whole face, unguarded, like something had been briefly set down. You are very kind, Mrs. Delamini, he said. I am honest, she said firmly. At my age I do not have the patience for kindness that costs me the truth. He laughed. A real laugh, warm and surprised, filling the new apartment with a sound I had not expected to hear there. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen of our new home, and watched my mother make a Korean Mafia boss laugh with his whole chest. And something that had been clenched inside me for a very long time, for longer than 6 weeks, for longer than 18 months, for longer perhaps than I had known, finally and completely let go. That was 11 months ago. My ankle healed. Not perfectly. The physiotherapist was honest with me that there would be some permanent residual weakness, some cold mornings where it would remind me quietly of what it endured. But I walk without pain now. I walk the way my grandmother would have recognized and approved, head up, back straight, without the weight of a hidden thing pressing me sideways with every step. My mother is still with us. Her disease has not reversed and will not reverse, but she is comfortable. She has her chair by the window where the morning sun falls across her lap, and she watches the street below with great interest and great opinions about everyone she sees. Grace is still with us. The bathroom has its proper bars now, and the building has its ramp, and a physiotherapist comes twice a month, and my mother receives her with the same magnificent authority with which she receives everyone. I am still Mr. Kang's secretary. Our professional relationship is the same, and it is different. The structure and the respect remain intact. He is my employer, and I value that clarity. But underneath the work there is now a layer of mutual acknowledgement, a quiet, earned understanding that did not exist before and cannot be explained simply. We do not speak of it. We do not need to. It exists the way the most permanent things exist, without announcement, without ceremony, without needing to be confirmed by words. A few months ago, I was making his coffee in the kitchen alcove, and he came in for water, and we stood beside each other briefly in the small space, and he asked, "How is your mother this week?" She told Grace that the pigeons on our windowsill have better conversational instincts than most people she has met, I said. He was quiet for a second. She is probably right, he said. I smiled into the coffee cup. She usually is. He took his water and went back to his office, and I stood in the small kitchen for a moment longer and held that exchange like something worth keeping. I have been asked by the few people I have told pieces of this to what I think it means, what the lesson is. What a woman is supposed to take away from 6 weeks of walking on a fractured ankle before anyone notices, before anything changes, before the truth finally breaks the surface. I have thought about it carefully, and I have 2 answers. The first is this: the pride that kept me walking is not something I am ashamed of. There is a kind of pride that is not vanity. It is dignity. It is the refusal to let the world see you as less than you are. My grandmother had it. My mother has it in abundance. I have it. It is not a flaw. In a world that has frequently tried to diminish people who look like me and come from where I come from, dignity is something you protect with everything you have. But the second answer is harder and truer. Dignity cannot become a prison. There is a point, and I had passed it by weeks, where carrying everything alone stops being strength and becomes a slow, quiet damage. I was destroying my body while calling it management. The fracture was real, the harm was real, and it was preventable. The difficulty is knowing who to trust with the truth of your life. Because there are people who will take your vulnerability and use it as evidence of your weakness, who will see your need and decide it makes you worth less. I have known those people. I have worked for them. My caution was not irrational, but not everyone is that person. And the real work, the work I am still learning, is the slow, careful work of telling the difference. Of watching over time who a person actually is when the pressure comes. Of learning to release the truth to someone who has shown themselves in small and consistent ways to be safe with it. Mr. Kang Joon-ho is not a simple man. His world contains real darkness, and I have never pretended otherwise. But the bandage left on my desk without a word. The hospital at 10 o'clock at night. The folder of apartment details that he had begun preparing the very evening I told him everything. The way he crouched beside my mother's wheelchair so she would not have to look up at him. Those things were real. The goodness in them was real. And real goodness, wherever it appears, in whatever complicated vessel it arrives, deserves to be seen. My mother says God places angels in unexpected places. She does not mean this sentimentally. She means it as observation, as practical truth. She means that the help you most need sometimes comes wearing an unfamiliar face, speaking an unfamiliar language, arriving from a direction you never thought to look. She means stay open. Even when everything in your history tells you to close, even when staying open has cost you before, stay open to the possibility that goodness exists in places you have not yet looked. I think about this when Mr. O holds the car door open in the morning. I think about it when I sit at my desk and hear Mr. Kang's voice through the office door and know that the person on the other side of that door sees me, not as a function, not as a convenience, but as a full human being whose life has weight and whose dignity has value. I think about it when I call home at lunchtime and my mother answers and tells me with great seriousness what the pigeons have been doing. My name is Nkwenda Dilamini. I am 35 years old. For 6 weeks I walked on a broken bone and called it fine. Now I know that being truly seen by even one person, seen completely, seen without flinching, seen as the full and complicated and worthy thing that you are, can change the entire temperature of a life. And the most important thing you may ever do in this life that asks so much of us is find the courage to let someone look. Ukubekazela akusho ukufa. Ukubekazela kusho ukankoba. Patience is not death, patience is victory. Zulu proverb as spoken by my grandmother Namvula Dilamini. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, expect more from here.